They say in this line of work, no day ends up normal. But this one? It rewrote the manual on chaos. The day kicked off early, like it always did back when I was pulling double duty as a squad leader and self-appointed morale booster for the junior crew. It's not easy earning their respect, and the brasses nod for promotion. So, there I was, cruising down the rain-slick streets of the district, the neon glow from the towering holoads bouncing off my windshield. My cybernetic HUD pinged 0615. Right on schedule. As I turned toward the compound, I couldn't miss the mess waiting for me. Emergency drones hovered above a hangar like vultures, their lights casting an eerie strobe across the crowds below. Firebots, med droids, and SEC force mechs swarmed the area. Judging by the chaos, it looked like someone had seriously screwed the pooch. Sucks to be them, I muttered, parking my old hover sedan and stepping into the shop. My neural link buzzed as I muted an incoming message. Work could wait until caffeine happened. No such luck. 3 of my night shift techs intercepted me like a squad of bounty hunters. Their faces screamed trouble even before Alpha blurted, "Boss, you see the fire units over at Hangar 17? "Yeah," I said, brushing past them. "Glad it's not our mess." Silence. 5 seconds later, my optimism evaporated. 2 seconds more, and my augmented brain pieced it together. It was my mess. I was the unlucky bastard who'd have to unravel it. I pinched the bridge of my nose, my cyber optics dimming to stave off the tension-induced migraine. After a slow exhale, I leveled them with a tone I reserve for catastrophic screw-ups and my teenage niece. What happened? Now, if you've ever worked near an F-16 Valkyrie, a sleek predator of the skies that's been refitted with cutting-edge stealth and plasma-guided tech, you know they don't suffer fools lightly. Every panel, circuit, and implant is engineered to perfection. And if something goes wrong? Well, it doesn't go wrong quietly. Near the cockpit of the Valkyrie, you'll find 2 yellow and black levers marked with "Rescue." These babies connect to the manual jettison system, a last-ditch mechanism designed to blow the canopy clear in emergencies. Think cockpit smoke or a pilot blacked out mid-flight. Problem is, these levers are also hooked up to a series of explosives. Pull them the wrong way, and you're throwing an unplanned fireworks display. Enter Airman Alpha. Alpha and Sergeant Doe had been tasked with swapping out one of these manual initiators. It's a routine job: replace the charge before it expires, check connections, call it a day. Except Alpha decided to get creative. The exact details are murky, witnesses weren't keen to talk, and Alpha wasn't in a chatty mood, but the facts? Painfully clear. Alpha skipped a crucial safety step, reinserting the fail-safe pin. Whatever tweak he made after that caused the system to trigger. The result? Every explosive in that cockpit lit up. Thankfully, the canopy was already detached for other maintenance. If it hadn't been, well, Alpha would have been vaporized on the spot. As it stood, we were left with a mangled interior, a grounded Valkyrie, and a repair bill that made my implants short-circuit. Alpha survived the incident physically unscathed, mentally, though. Another story. I found him slumped in a chair back at the shop, staring through the walls like he'd just seen the Grim Reaper's shadow. I left him to his thoughts. There were bigger fires to put out. First, I had to call in the brass. They'd demand explanations, and probably PowerPoint slides. Officers love PowerPoint, especially when you layer red arrows over damaged photos. I swear, if I ever see another red arrow, I'll file for psych trauma. Of course, nothing's ever simple. Protocol required immediate drug tests for everyone involved. By mid-morning, Alpha and Doe were downing liters of water to prep for the urinalysis. Standard procedure. Or so I thought. What came next would make the canopy incident look like a minor hiccup. It started with the usual mess and spiraled into a tale of digital breadcrumbs, poor decisions, and enough powdered nonsense to fuel a neon-lit city block. Sergeant Doe? Clean as a whistle. No surprise there. A seasoned vet with 10 years in the game and a reputation for keeping his chrome polished, he wasn't the type to dabble in extracurriculars. Airman Alpha, though? That's where things got interesting. When Alpha's drug test results came back, my augmented HUD flagged the readout, 1,800 milligrams of cocaine. My internal diagnostics nearly crashed trying to process the absurdity. I wasn't a narcotics expert, so I pinged a contact, a medtech specialist at a rehab district. They explained Alpha's levels weren't just high, they were skyscraper high. To hit numbers like that, he'd have needed a fresh bump within hours of the test. Translation? The man was likely snorting Peruvian bite dust in the shop's grimy bathroom before handling a multi-million credit fighter. As the street kids say, Alpha was about to fail the vibe check. Hard. Unrelated, at least at first, was Airman Bravo. Bravo wasn't involved in Alpha's cockpit calamity. He wasn't even on duty that shift. What linked them was proximity and bad habits. Bravo was Alpha's roommate, best buddy, and partner in crime, not that anyone knew it yet. A few days before Alpha's test results went live, Bravo had his own brush with urinalysis. Turns out, he'd been indulging in California cornflakes long enough to leave a traceable history in his bloodstream. The leadership wasn't blind, the connection between Alpha and Bravo was as neon bright as the alleyways outside. Naturally, our section chief saw the writing on the wall. Keen to show the higher-ups that we were on it, he requested a shop-wide drug sweep. Our commander, always eager to cover his chrome-plated ass, approved it without hesitation. Enter Airman Charlie, the wild card in this cyberpunk drama. Charlie wasn't what anyone would call stellar. He'd been loaned out to another unit before being booted back for, let's say, creative insubordination. His greatest hits included showing up late, skipping mandatory appointments, and fabricating sob stories about a non-existent daughter. Charming. If you hadn't guessed, Charlie was roommates with Alpha and Bravo. Birds of a feather, as they say. When word spread about Alpha and Bravo's positive tests, Charlie bolted to the nearest med center, claiming ear pain. The docs found nothing wrong but slapped him with a routine COVID test anyway. This was late 2020, after all. And per unit policy, a pending COVID result meant 5 days of quarantine. Convenient, right? 5 days also happens to be the exact window for Florida snow to clear out of a user's system. Suspicion hung over Charlie like a bad holo ad. Eventually, OSI stepped in. Alpha and Bravo's confiscated Neuralink logs confirmed what everyone suspected. Charlie wasn't just adjacent to the problem, he was part of it. When Charlie was summoned to the commander's office, he found a welcoming committee, the entire chain of command, SEC Force officers, and 3 OSI agents. They presented him with a warrant for his data stream and physical comms device. And that's when Charlie pulled a move straight out of a low-budget noir flick. In front of everyone, he yanked out his comlink, a sleek, black market model, and smashed it under his boot with a flourish. If subtlety were a weapon, Charlie wouldn't know which end to hold. Naturally, Charlie joined Alpha and Bravo on detail duty, earning the not-so-affectionate nickname, the 3 Cyberpunks. The 3 Cyberpunks were assigned to the kind of mindless tasks usually reserved for malfunctioning droids, pulling weeds, scrubbing blast shields, fetching supplies from the deepest storage bays. Their supervisor, however, was a walking lesson in how not to lead. Relegated to CSS for his laissez-faire attitude, he let them run wild. Reports started trickling in, the Cyberpunks were showing up in pairs instead of trios, vanishing mid-task, and taking 2-hour lunch breaks. When the assistant first sergeant found out, he unleashed a verbal Armageddon on the supervisor. I could hear it from across the building, muffled through layers of steel and circuitry. Charlie's downfall, though inevitable, lacked the dramatic flair his shattered comlink promised. His decision to destroy evidence complicated prosecution, leaving the commander to settle for an Article 15. It came with all the trimmings, a ranked demotion, other than honorable discharge, and a field-grade reprimand for good measure. Adding insult to injury, Charlie showed up late to his Article 15 meeting. That was the final straw. After confiscating his ID, we escorted him off base, his career dismantled like a cheap cyber implant. Charlie left the gates for good that day. We haven't stayed in touch. Bravo? Oh, he was screwed. I got a front row seat at his court-martial, one of the few perks of rank and curiosity. Turns out, Bravo wasn't just indulging, he was running a full-fledged side hustle in the local party district. The investigation revealed Bravo was moving more than spare parts. He'd been part of a drug ring, selling and transporting Colombian bite dust to club hoppers across the neon-lit sprawl. The OSI logs painted a grim picture: encrypted chats, hollow messages, and enough transactions to warrant a corporate audit. And then there was the photo. Confiscated from his neural feed, it showed two parallel lines of powder on a sleek chrome table, captioned, "About to go skiing in this bitch." Timestamp? 45 minutes before his shift started. The judge didn't just throw the book at him, they launched it with the force of a railgun. 6 months confinement, reduction to E1, forfeiture of all pay, and a bad conduct discharge. Bravo's descent was swift, brutal, and entirely self-inflicted. Alpha, the original powder jockey, nearly got off easy. The commander had taken pity on him, impressed by the kid's crocodile tears and genuine remorse. The deal? An other than honorable discharge. A slap on the wrist compared to Bravo's fate. But then Alpha had to go and piss hot again. This time, it wasn't for disco dust but for a more natural contraband, devil's lettuce. And that was it. Game over. The commander, already fed up with this circus, decided Alpha would get his time in front of the gavel, too. Alpha's trial wasn't the spectacle Bravo's was, but it got the job done: reduction to E1, 6 months confinement, and forfeiture of 2/3 pay. He dodged a BCD, likely because they couldn't tie him to dealing. Alpha faded into obscurity, or so I thought. About a year ago, his name surfaced in the most ironic way possible. Our career field occasionally contracts out prior service civilians, especially for smaller installations running experimental missions. One of these contractors pinged us for a reference. Guess who had applied? Mr. About to go skiing in this bitch himself. I couldn't resist. I informed the contractor that I was restricted in what I could say but was authorized to disclose one critical detail: Alpha's court-martial was for grossly inadequate performance of his primary duties, and his clearance had been revoked. Now, our field is tighter than a neural net firewall. News spreads fast. Within 24 hours, the contractor had the full story, likely thanks to the Air Force JAG's public database. Needless to say, Mr. Alpha wasn't hired. And so, the tales of Bravo and Alpha ended as they began, cautionary footnotes in the logs of a small but interconnected career field. Some stories you just can't make up. Alpha and Bravo may have been history, but their legacy lingered like a corrupted data trail. Every corner of the unit buzzed with whispers about the infamous Three Amigos, and while Bravo faced the harshest penalties and Alpha managed to scrape by, Charlie's fate remained the most perplexing. You'd think smashing his own comlink in front of the commander, OSI agents, and SEC would have been his definitive swan song. But no, the galaxy doesn't work that neatly. Charlie got off with an Article 15, a loss of stripes, and an other than honorable discharge. Sure, it wasn't a parade out the gate, but it also wasn't the fiery exit one might expect for someone who committed that level of career suicide in broad daylight. Yet, as Charlie trudged out of the gates with his head down, I couldn't help but wonder if that was really the last of him. People like Charlie had a knack for finding new ways to become problems in someone else's unit. The shop, however, wasn't ready to let this saga rest. Leadership decided a full recalibration was in order, a shop-wide drug test. It wasn't just about rooting out the stragglers, it was a statement to the higher-ups, we've got this under control. The results? Thankfully, no more surprises. But the atmosphere remained charged, paranoid. Everyone started looking over their shoulders, suspicious of even the slightest misstep. Morale dipped to a low I hadn't seen in years. When you work in an environment as demanding as ours, trust isn't just a nice-to-have, it's the foundation of everything. And the amigos had managed to obliterate it. That paranoia didn't just stay within the shop, either. Rumors started circulating across the base, and soon enough, the rest of the career field was giving us the side eye. Being part of an elite unit loses its shine when everyone thinks you're one bad test away from being the next headline. Leadership tried everything to course correct. We held team-building exercises, introduced stricter oversight, and revamped the mentorship program. The goal was simple: rebuild the unit's integrity one day at a time. But damage like this doesn't just heal overnight. I'll give credit where it's due, though. Our new section chief, a grizzled vet with more years in the field than some of us had been alive, stepped up in ways that mattered. He didn't just bark orders or throw blame around, he took the time to rebuild trust. One-on-one meetings, personalized development plans, he worked overtime to remind us why we were here in the first place. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Life moved on, as it always does, but the memories of the amigos lingered like ghosts in the machine. It wasn't until much later that I heard the next chapter of their lives, or rather, their downfalls. Charlie, the would-be escape artist, had reportedly burned through his severance and found himself jobless. Last I heard, he was trying to work security for a small-time corpo on the outskirts of the city. The irony wasn't lost on me. Bravo? His 6 months in confinement didn't seem to teach him much. A buddy from OSI mentioned seeing his name pop up in another investigation. He'd apparently taken his talents to the black market, dealing in stolen cyberware. The word was he'd been caught trying to offload a stolen LIM module to an undercover agent. Some people just don't learn. Alpha, though, had the most surprising twist. Turns out, after being rejected from our career field civilian contractor program, he managed to weasel his way into another job, off-planet logistics. A cushy position, by all accounts, until his background check caught up with him. I heard he was terminated mid-mission, left stranded on a backwater station with nothing but his duffel and his bad decisions. Lessons in the neon fog. Looking back, it's hard not to reflect on the bigger picture. The amigos weren't just 3 bad apples, they were a symptom of a larger problem. Pressure, boredom, the illusion of invincibility, these things can break even the best among us. But that doesn't mean their actions were excusable. In this line of work, mistakes don't just affect you, they ripple outward, impacting everyone who relies on you. And in our world, where every decision can mean the difference between life and death, there's no room for selfishness. If there's one thing I've learned from this, it's that integrity isn't just a word on a mission patch or a motto on a wall. It's the foundation of everything we do. Lose that, and you lose everything. The amigos may be gone, but their story lives on, a cautionary tale for the next generation of operators. And as much as I hate to admit it, they've taught me more about what not to do than any training manual ever could. Life moves on, but some lessons are hardwired into your core. This was one of them. The fallout from the 3 amigos saga didn't just end with their departures. The shop was different now, quieter in some ways, yet far more tense in others. The trust we used to have, that implicit understanding that every member of the team had your back, had been shaken. It's not something that comes back overnight, if at all. People stopped joking around as much. Conversations became guarded. Even the harmless camaraderie of sharing a coffee during downtime felt forced, like everyone was waiting for the next shoe to drop. Leadership, determined to show they were taking action, ramped up their presence. Daily check-ins, additional inspections, mandatory drug awareness briefings, each step felt like both an effort to control the damage and a way to remind everyone of the disaster we were working to put behind us. There was a sense that we were being watched more closely, even when it wasn't warranted. And maybe it wasn't paranoia. After all, the Amigos had managed to operate under the radar for so long that no one wanted to risk being caught off guard again. At first, these measures felt suffocating, but over time, they became part of the routine. The shop started to stabilize, albeit slowly. There was a new emphasis on mentorship, with senior NCOs taking a more active role in guiding younger airmen. The section chief, a no-nonsense veteran who had seen his fair share of screw-ups, made it clear that everyone would be held accountable for their actions. He wasn't harsh, but he was firm, and his presence alone seemed to command respect. Under his leadership, the team began to rebuild some semblance of cohesion. Still, the memory of the Amigos lingered. Their story had become something of a cautionary tale, whispered about during late shifts or brought up when someone started to toe the line. "Don't pull an alpha" became shorthand for poor judgment, while "going bravo" meant taking things a step too far. And Charlie? He was the poster boy for what not to do when faced with consequences. The nicknames were grim, but they served their purpose. No one wanted to be the next chapter in that story. Months passed, and life moved on. The shop's reputation, tarnished as it was, began to recover. It helped that there were no further incidents, no more surprises during random tests or questionable behavior caught on security cameras. Slowly, the stigma of being part of the unit faded, though it would take years before people stopped mentioning the Amigos whenever our shop was brought up in conversation. Even then, the shadow of their actions loomed, a reminder of how quickly things can spiral out of control. As for the Amigos themselves, their fates played out in predictable but still disappointing ways. Charlie, who had escaped the worst consequences, didn't fare much better in civilian life. Rumors filtered back that he'd bounced between odd jobs, unable to hold down anything steady. His other-than-honorable discharge followed him everywhere, a black mark that no amount of fast-talking could erase. Eventually, he seemed to vanish entirely, leaving behind nothing but memories of his spectacular failures. Bravo, as expected, couldn't stay out of trouble. His time in confinement didn't seem to change him, and it wasn't long before his name surfaced again. This time, he'd been caught running a side hustle smuggling stolen tech components. OSI wasn't surprised, they'd had a close eye on him since his court-martial. When they finally caught him red-handed, it felt like the inevitable conclusion to his story. Last I heard, he was facing another round of charges, this time in the civilian courts. It seemed like he was destined to spend the rest of his life chasing bad decisions with worse ones. Alpha's story, however, was the most surprising. After serving his sentence, he tried to piece his life back together. There was talk that he'd managed to land a job off-world, working in logistics for a private contractor. For a while, it seemed like he might have turned things around. But as always, the past has a way of catching up. Word got out about his court-martial, and the company cut ties with him. The last anyone heard, he was stranded on some backwater colony, trying to scrape together enough credits to buy a ticket home. Through it all, the lessons of the Amigos stayed with me. They weren't just cautionary tales, they were reminders of how fragile trust can be and how easily a single decision can ripple outward, affecting everyone around you. It wasn't just about them screwing up their own lives, they'd left a mess for the rest of us to clean up, and it had taken months, even years, to undo the damage. In the end, I couldn't say I felt sorry for them. They'd made their choices, and they'd paid the price. But their story wasn't just about three individuals who couldn't follow the rules. It was about the importance of integrity, accountability, and the understanding that in this line of work, there's no room for selfishness. We rely on each other too much to let ego or carelessness get in the way. The three amigos may be gone, but their impact remains, a permanent reminder etched into the collective memory of our unit. And while I wouldn't wish a repeat of their antics on anyone, I can't deny that their story has shaped the way I approach my own responsibilities. Sometimes, the biggest lessons come from the most unexpected places, even if they're wrapped in chaos and poor decisions. The years that followed the Three Amigos debacle were far from uneventful. The shop eventually settled into a new rhythm, and we worked hard to restore a sense of normalcy. I poured myself into my duties, determined to uphold the standards that had been so thoroughly tarnished. The events had been a stark reminder of how easily things could fall apart if we let our guard down. The idea of failure, not just personal failure, but letting down the people who relied on me, became a driving force in my career. But life, as it often does, had other plans. The first signs were subtle, headaches that wouldn't go away, an occasional shortness of breath that I chalked up to long hours and stress. I ignored them, as most of us do. After all, there was always work to be done, equipment to maintain, inspections to pass. Who had time to worry about the little aches and pains that came with the job? Then one day, while running a diagnostic on a faulty system, the room spun violently. I grabbed the nearest console to steady myself, sweat dripping down my face as my vision blurred. It felt like the world was tilting on its axis, and for a moment, I was sure I was going to pass out. When the sensation passed, I brushed it off as dehydration or exhaustion. It wasn't until weeks later, when I collapsed in the middle of the hangar, that I realized something was seriously wrong. The diagnosis was grim. Stage 4 glioblastoma, an aggressive form of brain cancer. The doctor explained it in clinical terms, detailing the options, which were limited. Surgery was risky, radiation offered only a slight chance of slowing the tumor's growth, and chemotherapy came with its own set of challenges. The prognosis was clear: I had, at best, a year. A year. I didn't tell anyone at first. How do you even start that conversation? Hey, by the way, I'm dying. It felt surreal, like I was living someone else's life. I went about my days as if nothing had changed, determined to keep things as normal as possible for as long as I could. But the symptoms worsened, and hiding them became impossible. The headaches grew unbearable, my coordination faltered, and even simple tasks became monumental challenges. Eventually, I had no choice but to come clean. The response from my team was overwhelming. They rallied around me, offering support in ways I hadn't expected. People I barely knew showed up at my door with meals, offers to help with errands, anything to lighten the load. For the first time, I truly understood the meaning of camaraderie. It wasn't just a word we threw around during briefings or wrote on performance reviews, it was real, tangible, and deeply humbling. As my condition worsened, I was placed on medical leave. Sitting at home, away from the hustle and camaraderie of the shop, was torture. I felt useless, a ghost of my former self. The military had been my life, my identity, and now it felt like I was fading away, bit by bit. But even as my body failed me, I couldn't let go of the sense of duty that had defined me for so long. When the call came, I didn't hesitate. It was an emergency, a critical piece of equipment had malfunctioned, and the usual techs were tied up with other urgent issues. They needed someone with my expertise, someone who could fix the problem quickly. I wasn't supposed to be working, but I couldn't say no. This was my chance to do something that mattered, to remind myself, and everyone else, that I wasn't done yet. The hangar was a flurry of activity when I arrived. The team looked surprised to see me, but no one questioned it. They handed me the tools, briefed me on the situation, and stepped back. I dove in, the familiar rhythm of the work calming my frayed nerves. For a while, it felt like old times, like I was back in my element, doing what I was meant to do. Then something went wrong. The equipment was under pressure, a system designed to handle enormous forces. A critical valve had been miscalibrated, and as I adjusted it, the system overloaded. There was a deafening hiss, followed by a sharp, metallic groan. I barely had time to register what was happening before the explosion tore through the hangar. The blast threw me backward, slamming me into the far wall. Pain erupted through my body, sharp and searing, but it was the cold that struck me most, a chilling numbness that crept through my limbs as blood pooled around me. I could hear shouting, footsteps pounding across the hangar floor, but it all felt distant, like I was watching it happen to someone else. As my vision dimmed, memories flooded my mind, the laughter of my team during late-night shifts, the pride I'd felt every time we completed a mission, the mistakes, the victories, the friendships. And then, the faces of those who'd been lost along the way, their absence a weight I'd carried silently for years. In those final moments, I felt a strange sense of peace. I'd spent my life in service, trying to make a difference, to be someone my team could rely on. And while I hadn't been perfect, I'd done my best. That had to count for something. The world around me faded, the chaos of the hangar giving way to a quiet stillness. My last thought was simple, almost absurd: I hope I fixed the damn valve.